Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Chitheads. I'm here with Jillian Turecki today. And Jillian is a special guest for me because she's actually one of my current teachers. She teaches at Kula Yoga Project in Williamsburg in Brooklyn and also in the Tribeca location in Manhattan. She is really at the forefront of a movement that is really starting to integrate Iyengar with Vinyasa, and so I gain a lot of inspiration from her classes for my own. And she's also in the last year taken a shift to working a lot with relationships, and so we're going to really focus on that today, and I'll ask her a lot of questions on what she thinks are the kind of fundamental modern obstacles to relating with one another. So hello, Jillian. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
So one thing that I wanted to get you to talk about is just the story of your practice. So, how did you come to yoga? How did you, what were kind of the key moments of transition in your own practice and in your relationship with teaching? And also then kind of segue us into then this more recent shift toward working on relationships and how your yoga practice has kind of brought you to this place.
Okay, so 15 years ago, I was always into movement. I was always into dancing. I was never a professional dancer. I went to the gym a lot. I always basically needed to use my body as a way to release energy or create energy. And I was really stiff. Like, I couldn't touch my toes. And my boyfriend at the time was literally like, this is pathetic. You got to go to a yoga class. So I went to a yoga class at Crunch Fitness, and back in the day, and I loved it. I loved it. And what I love so much about it was, I think I needed the variety. I needed to do something totally different with my body that I had been doing. And I just felt so amazing afterwards. And so I immediately took to it and started practicing like 4 to 5 times a week, developed a home practice, as scary as it must have looked at the time. And then did a teacher training, I guess, 4 or 5 years into practice, 4 years into practice. And and then...
What teacher training did you do?
I did Laughing Lotus. Mm-hmm. And, at the time, there was not a lot of teacher trainings. The only thing that was really happening in New York was Om, Yoga, Jivamukti, and Laughing Lotus.
Yeah.
So even though I was practicing a little bit at Om, I started to practice at this place called Bhava Yoga, which was this tiny little, like, hole-in-the-wall yoga studio in a converted, like, community center in the East Village, which is where I met one of my current teachers, Skylar Grant, who started Kula Yoga. So I did my training at Laughing Lotus, and it was...
So you met Skylar before Kula?
Oh, yeah, way before Kula.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. And and she was, has been my teacher for about, 12 years. So I did the teacher training at Laughing Lotus, the 200-hour, and it was great. It's a great training. It's what I needed at the time. Mm-hmm. And then I very quickly segued into becoming a teacher. I got a private client right away, and I taught some community classes at Laughing Lotus. And at the time, I started going back to Kula because it just really resonated with me most. And Kula had, at the time, like, opened up its doors maybe like a year prior, and I took a hiatus from Kula just to immerse myself at Laughing Lotus to do the training. And then I started practicing again at Kula, and Kula was like a tiny little shop back then.
It was a different location?
It was just Tribeca, but just one room and a tiny room. And I sort of entered that teaching community at a very good time. There were just like a couple of teachers, 2 teachers on
wow.
There were more, but nothing like amazing. And I, auditioned. Mm-hmm. This was, how many years ago now? I want to say it's 10 or 11 years. And I immediately got put on the schedule, and we didn't have basic class at the time, and there was all these classes that were just sort of, it was just at a really good time. So that's how I started teaching.
And what was your style of teaching like at that time? Because, obviously now you've moved into a very mindful, very alignment-based, like very intelligent form of vinyasa.
Right.
With a lot of, as I was mentioning at the beginning, very informed by Iyengar principles and the kind of innovative approach to practice that they have in the use of props. So what was your practice like at that time, or what was your teaching like?
Well, I, at the time, had a very strong commitment and immersion within Anusara yoga. So I always had an interest in alignment, and it was always something that could be seen in my classes.
Okay.
So it just wasn't Iyengar, it was Anusara. And I think that I wanted to go more in that direction. And Kula was always very specific in its teaching. And Skylar had a lot of background in alignment stuff. And it was a slower flow, and it was a more specific flow, and very intelligent. Like, intelligence was always a part of the sequencing. And so I just sort of gravitated towards that. And then the Anusara was like part of it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So then moving into more, the contemporary scene now with your life, what has, how has your own yoga practice and kind of the situation of your life led you to this relationship work?
Okay. So I've been teaching now, if you were to include like my first private, I've been teaching now for almost 12 years, so like 11 and a half years. And I would say like 3 to 4 years ago, I started to have this feeling of like I wanted more, but I just didn't know what it looked like. Like, would I open a studio? Like, what was sort of like the next step for me? Was I going to travel the world and teach these workshops and, be that kind of like teacher? And it just became clearer to me. I knew that I didn't want to open up a studio.
Yeah.
I didn't want to open something that was going to like compete with Kula. And I'm so not like, I just don't want to own a business in that way. It's just not my interest at all. And I knew that something would have to come into my life that would be complementary to everything, because what I love about yoga is that it builds the awareness. It shifts your physiology. The moment you shift your physiology, you're affecting your psychology. But it's just sort of like, you do all this yoga, and then what? Then what? And part of it is like, yeah, I wanted to make more money, and I didn't want to like slave, and teach 15 classes a day. I didn't want to do that route at all and do the burnout. It's so uninteresting to me, and it's not really good for us as teachers to burn out. The whole point is to keep the fire burning,
for
and
sure.
alive, and that's how we're supposed to lead.
And there is a lot of burnout happening with teachers working too much.
Oh, so much.
Yeah, and they just get on autopilot. You can tell it's very scripted.
It's very scripted. It's so much because people are trying to pay rent. But the thing is, it's this is about sustainability.
Right.
And I had recent events that were really traumatic in my life, and it was sort of like the impetus that it was like that. When anything breaks down, I believe it's because it's creating room for something to be built up.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have like Shiva destroying,
Exactly.
and then things need to like rebuild itself. And
Everything is fertile soil for something new to grow.
Oh, everything. And when your world actually falls apart, when things really do fall apart, I believe it's the universe sort of like knocking on your door and saying, wake up.
Yeah.
This is not the path that you were supposed to be on. Let's see what the new path is. And although I've never doubted yoga as part of my path, it's very clear for me. I started to study with Anthony Robbins and coaching and the way that he coaches. And I became a life coach, which I hate to call myself a life coach because his school is called strategic intervention. So there's something very strategic about it. everything that he does is to return the person to a greater sense of fulfillment and purpose. And I believe that that's what we're doing as yogis. And he does focus a large part on relationships. And I'm not just a relationship coach, but I do focus on relationships because of the failures of my past relationship. I wanted to understand all this.
Yeah.
And I see people in so much pain. And I also see people breaking up when they really don't need to, but it's because they just don't have the tools. They don't know any better to stay together. And so if I can help people grow in their relationships, if I can keep people together who I feel should be together, they just don't know how to be together, then that's the kind of work I want to do.
So do you think that a yoga practice just inherently prepares a person to be more receptive in relationships, or do you think that there's a way of practicing yoga that can keep you just as kind of limited and contracted and incapable of relating in the way that you're trying to help people relate?
Right. It's a good question. You know, sometimes I feel like yoga is so powerful that just practicing it is going to create shift. And I do believe that. But I also believe that we are creatures of habit. And the patterns that we habituate in life are going to creep their way into our yoga practice.
Right.
And yes, I do believe that there is a way to practice where there's not a lot of shift happening. I think there's always shifts occurring, but it's not always optimal. But the reality is that the more mature you become in your practice, it'll always lead you towards more healing.
Yeah.
The purpose will be healing, not the handstand.
Yeah.
Always.
I'm actually really glad you said that because, you know, my practice, and this is what I see with a lot of people who've been practicing maybe less than a year, a couple years, is that they're very attracted to kind of the more fitness-oriented classes. Like when I went to yoga, what I loved about it, and I also first encountered yoga at a gym, was how hard it was and how, you know, physically just challenging it was. And I didn't really care about any of the philosophy. I didn't care about alignment. I just cared about this like crazy, sweaty experience that I had. And so, you know, I teach hot yoga at a certain studio. And there are also students there that perhaps, you know, the class they really should be spending some time in is an Iyengar class or an alignment basics class. But I would never have gone to an Iyengar class when I first started practicing.
No way.
It would have bored the hell out of me.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
now that's all I want to do. I want to like go to 3 Iyengar classes a week so that I can, you know, learn so much more in a subtle way about my physicality. So I think you're totally right, and I think that's a good point to make, that it's not so much, you know, we should be telling people who are new to their practice, so this is what you need, but that there's just something about the logic of the practice as you mature in it that leads you to the subtler and leads you to the more intelligent kind of awakening process.
Always. Always. And I agree with you. There's no point in telling a student who's like, even within the first 5 years of their practice, certainly the first year, but even maybe for some, even the first 5 years, like, you know, you can suggest it, but, you know, to get frustrated at their just wanting the challenge, I mean, that's just part of the growth. That's part of the trajectory.
Yeah.
We get into it because it's a challenge. And it challenges us in a way that is totally different in other ways that we've been challenged. And there's so much significance and there's so much meaning in that in and of itself. Sometimes we'd need a good kick in the ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes that's what yoga gives you in the beginning. So, and even now.
Yeah, even now.
I need a good kick in the ass. But
and your classes kick ass
Yeah.
too. I mean, they're very intelligent, they're very subtle, but they're also very hard.
Yeah.
A lot of weeks. Yeah.
So, you know, and also a kick in the ass can look different for everyone, you know? So, but for sure, the longer you practice, you want to know what an advanced practice is. It's, you know, someone who is interested in the healing, in the longevity, in the subtle body.
Yeah.
Always. It just always happens that way. And so I think that in my, you know, with all the years that I've been practicing, which is like, you know, not a short amount of time, but of course not a long amount of time compared to, you know, some of the teachers I have out there, I feel like it's only natural that I want more healing. And the thing is, it's like, you know, the yoga deals with the body, and some of the philosophy is, the way that it's presented is a little too esoteric for me. And I feel like with the coaching that I do, it's all yogic philosophy, but it really just brings it to reality.
Great. So I love that as a segue, because I want to that was actually the next question I wanted to ask you, is what aspects of yoga philosophy, whether, it's, certain texts or teachings that inform, what are they, and how do they inform this perspective on relationships?
Right. So, I mean, look, I could sit here and bullshit you and tell you it's the Bhagavad Gita or the sutras. And I have to tell you, I've read them all. I've read different translations of it. And of course, there's like elements to it. I love metaphor. And, when you read this, it's all metaphor. And I love symbolism. I grew up loving Greek mythology. Like, this is like so all in keeping. But it's hard to read. It's like harder than Shakespeare. And like, Shakespeare, you need like a teacher to like break it down and all that. And I have to say, I can't really quote like any or say that there's any one particular book, but it's more the message. And the message is always a return to the heart. Always a return to the heart. The mind is a beautiful thing, but the mind is designed to keep you out of danger. The heart is not designed to keep you out of danger. The mind is there to remind you of all the past wounds, of everything else, to keep you out of danger. It has its purpose. But it's always the path to the heart. And so, I mean, you could read any book on yogic philosophy. You can read any, like, Wayne Dyer, Joseph Campbell, Marianne Williamson. My favorite book right now is Return to Love. So
who wrote that?
Marianne Williamson.
Marianne Williamson.
Yeah. So it really is it's getting back into your heart. Getting back into balance, back into your heart. And so with relationships, fear is always the ego. Love is always the pursuit of the soul. So in relationships, I mean, in the kind of coaching that I do, there's very specific strategies that I use. So it's not just like hocus pocus and love and this, but the ultimate goal is to get people more in touch with who they really are, and not so stuck in the ego, and not so selfish. That's why relationships fall apart, because we're so selfish.
So I hear you saying that the mind is about a kind of security mechanism. So what is it?
Or figuring out problems, like problem solving.
So what I hear you saying a little bit is that a lot of the obstruction, the obstacles to relationship or to relating effectively is a little bit that we're too in our heads.
Yeah, we're too in our heads and we're too in our own egos. We're just too all about self.
Yeah.
It's just the bottom line. It's like, and especially now, culturally speaking, in our generation, it's all about 50-50. I give you this so that you give me this, so I give you this. And so there's like there's all this like talk about evenness and equality and even playing field. And you know what? It doesn't fucking work.
No.
That's a transaction.
It's like everybody has a tally, tally board. Like, totally. I gave this to that person. When are they going to get me back? There's no like offering. There's no like sense of like service.
No sense of service. And the thing is, that is what is killing relationships today. And it makes sense, because it's like we're coming back from an earlier time, or we're rebounding from an earlier time where it's like man dominant, woman submissive. So now everything's like even. And as a result, men are losing their balls. Women are losing like their softness and their receptivity and like all the things that makes a feminine strong. And it's like, and we're becoming so selfish. It's all about self. And in a relationship, for a relationship to work, it's got to be all about the other person. That doesn't mean that obviously sometimes, I'm not suggesting someone become a doormat. This excludes.
Yeah. So actually, what is the kind of, because there is kind of a balance there, and when does being all about the other person and serving the other person, when does that, like how do you, if you're completely in that modality, how do you recognize when the conditions are such that actually this is an abusive situation, this is a potentially abusive situation? I was in this one particular community, a spiritual community, my first teacher training, and it was a very specific form of Tibetan Buddhism that actually, subsequently I've realized had a very problematic interpretation of a certain concept of emptiness. And attached to this concept was the idea that, everything is your projection. Well, if everything is your projection, then, you could end up telling yourself and legitimizing behavior from your partner that is abusive, saying, well, that's just the way that I'm seeing it. If I could just shift my perspective enough, then I would realize that actually, he's helping me, or this experience is a gift.
Slippery slope.
Yeah.
Slippery slope of esoteric philosophical masturbation. Nothing I hate more. It's so annoying. I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you, I'll break it down for you. Part of the breakdown in like romantic relationships is we come from a belief system that we are without. Mm-hmm. And so we get into relationships to get love. As opposed
to fill ourselves up.
As opposed to entering a relationship from a place of abundance and getting into a relationship to give, because that is our true nature, is to give. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, of course, there are situations where you give and you are... The thing here, people who are in abusive situations, and I've been in one too, like, not physical, but emotional, we've all experienced that on some level, right? People who are in abusive relationships, they're still giving to get. Because they think that if they keep giving, they'll get love.
Yeah.
And so it's still the same old belief system. If you are abundant and you just keep giving, but you realize that someone is actually not at a place where you are, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, for whatever the reasons are, you walk away.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because actually another really problematic teaching that I remember was a part of this community was the idea that it was this very kind of simple and reductive idea of karma, where it was like, if you want to be wealthy, you got to give money away. So it wasn't that, the ultimate teaching is what you're teaching, which is kind of the value, the standalone value of being of service and giving, just for the beauty of giving, because it reflects our true nature. But actually, ultimately, it came back to you. It was like, you're giving not because, you're just overflowing and you're abundant and you're offering, money to a person in need. You're giving because you want this, like, you think that that's going to like trick the system, and then you're going to have this kind of like, boomerang of money coming back to you somewhere down the line, which I just thought, it's just so...
No, it misses the point.
Yeah.
It misses the point. And it's hard. I mean, this is all easier said than done, so this is not me preaching. Like, whatever I say, these are all lessons that I have to learn for myself, and these are all things that I have to contemplate. Do I enter relationships from a place of scarcity? Can I actually feel abundant? Can I give? Because our greatest fear, the two greatest fears of all human beings is, and this is something that I learned from Tony Robbins, and it rings so true for me. I've taken the last year to really reflect upon this, and it's so true, is that we're not enough, and that if we're not enough, we're not going to be loved. So if you were to really think very honestly about your current relationship or your past relationships with anybody most of the decisions that they made were made based out of fear, and fear of not being enough. And if they're not enough, it's that they won't be loved. And so when you have two people operating like that in a relationship, it may work. Anyone can make a marriage work. Anyone can make a relationship work. But work and thrive are two different things. Anyone can stay married for 100 years. Anyone can do it. So, as far as relating the yoga and the coaching, it really is like, okay, so here you are, you practice, you change your physiology. You feel different. You feel more balanced. You feel more heart-based. You feel more grounded. Whatever it is, you feel different. You feel more like yourself. Then what? What are you going to do with it? Because in my opinion, the epidemic that I'm seeing today in the yoga community, and this is myself included, is that we're doing all this stuff to change our psychology, to change our mind through our bodies and our breath. But then what are we doing with it? Like, what decisions are we making?
Looking hot.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously. Fixing my ass, yo. Yeah. But what are we doing with it? How are we actually making our lives more fulfilling as a result?
Well, and I think, I'm happy you said that, because I think that there is, I think it just sort of just ends with kind of, I'm healthier, I'm fitter. And a lot of people, that's just sort of the end of the road. But, even it doesn't often end with this idea that it's about love and service. It ends with this idea that I'm healthier and happier, but it's ultimately just about your own individual experience. It's not necessarily I'm healthier and happier. I mean, you get that sometimes. You hear it said in classes, like you're aligning yourself so that you can get out of your own way, so that you can be of service to others. But I feel like even when that's said, there's still kind of an underlying compulsion to do the practice just for kind of your own bliss. So ultimately, it ends up being not a relational act.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes we need to practice because we're just feeling really dark. And we need to transmute the darkness into lightness. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not about bringing the dark into the light, but really just bringing the light into the dark. And that's fine. But what's the larger purpose? This is something that I would love all of us to contemplate more. Like, what purpose does that really serve beyond the self? What does that mean? So if you're actually transmuting the darkness into light, and you are becoming more light, then it's your responsibility to share that light, whatever that looks like. And also, sometimes the practice is really motivating. You feel really motivated after. So what are you procrastinating in your life? What are you not doing? What are you not getting done? You feel motivated? Like, check off something off your list. Do something. Get into action. So that's like a lot of what I was craving. It was just like, so I got all this yoga and everything, but now what? Because there's a lot of us yogis that are still depressed and still feeling dark. And we keep practicing and practicing and practicing, trying to burn, the tapas and all that. But we're still, and so I really feel like with the coaching, it's like it takes it a step further. It's like we still actually have to transform our lives into something that we really want it to be. And I don't think that yoga is the only way there.
So do you think that the lingering depression is related to a problem with relationships?
Well, first I want to say, I don't mean to say that all yogis are like depressed. I'm just saying, but I still think that there are people, it's not like, so we're all practicing this very ancient system that's supposed to bring more light into our lives, but a lot of us are not feeling very light.
It's not embedded in a larger framework.
Yeah, I mean, or like what else does, it's not changing all the patterns. It's a step in the right direction, but then what next? What next? So it's not just relationships. Some people are depressed for whatever reason. Or depressed would be a strong word. Just feeling dark. And they're practicing, but the lightness is not coming, or it's coming, but it's transient. So what does it take to really make a shift? Great.
Okay, so I want to ask you a little bit now about relationships. So you're doing a workshop 2 Saturdays from now?
Yeah, a free talk. It's the third free talk I'm giving out of a series, yeah.
Great. So I want to give all the details for that towards the end of our chat, but I wanted to ask you what you would say are the major kind of problems or obstacles that relationships are encountering in, modern society.
Okay, so what I touched upon before, the whole 50-50, we're in a partnership. This is a contract. I do for you, you do for me, and this very even playing field. It's a step in the right direction as compared to how relationships were in the 1950s and all that, but it doesn't work. There's no passion in that. And then you're just giving to get. So I would say that's like the main problem. Like, I just think that even using the word partner has become, it was first like in the gay community. Now it's like everyone's using it. My partner, gay or straight, my partner. And it's like, I think it should just be a word that's eradicated from the gay and the straight community, because partner just implies like a business transaction. Say anything else, lover, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, husband, wife. So I would urge people to really think about what that really means. Like, what you're in a partnership, like that's just not very sexy. It sounds compatible, but it's not very sexy. So, and then another thing is, and what comes with that is that we are entering relationships so protected. And I understand why, and it's not a judgment, but we're entering relationships so protected, and we don't really take the time, like, in the beginning of a relationship, what we refer to as the honeymoon period, what makes it so blissful is that each person has a genuine curiosity about the other person. They want to know everything about him or her. They want to get to the bottom. Like, we're like little detectives trying to figure out what makes them tick, what turns them on, what lights them up, what makes them sad, this and that. And the reason why the honeymoon period fades, and it doesn't have to, is because all of a sudden we stop getting curious and we start thinking about ourselves because we become very fearful. And so if you want to keep a relationship thriving and alive, you have to continuously be very curious about what makes this other human being light up, and do everything you can to light that person up, just like you did in the beginning. And when they fuck up, when they fuck up, is to have some heartfelt understanding. We are so judgmental. We are constantly judging ourselves. We are constantly judging our partners. Of course, people can mess up. They can cheat. They can do, or they can, be abusive. And you definitely have to have a strong sense of self to leave something that no longer serves you, that really doesn't feel deep in your heart healthy or right. That's a whole other conversation. But the majority of the time, when relationships are not working, it's not because of abuse. It's because of people being selfish and not doing...
And losing interest in the other person.
Yeah, just not doing what they did in the beginning. You want your relationship to be like how it was in the beginning? Don't think about who you were in the beginning. You keep attracting the same kind of person. Better said is, you want a certain kind of person to be attracted to you. How are you going to become that person? Who are you in the beginning of a relationship? Because the key component to a healthy relationship is emotional fitness. So you want someone who's emotionally fit, you got to become emotionally fit. And if you decide that you're in a relationship with someone who really just isn't fit emotionally and can't get there, you just part ways. It's fine. But that's really that's what's going on in relationships today.
Yeah, and it seems like the lack of emotional fitness, I mean, it seems to me that we're socialized, and I think it's also represented in, in media and in movies,
right,
that there's, and you sort of touched on this before, that there's a lack. There's an emotional lack, and a partner, or a relationship is really supposed to be the person that fills that emotional lack. And so there isn't this coming from a place of fullness or abundance that you were talking about before. But it's so hard. What you're saying is really radical, because it's really going against all of the messages that are being sent.
Oh, totally.
The way that we're socialized from a young age to think that, that there's a soulmate out there that is, your other half, and you're going to feel empty until that kind of perfect puzzle piece fits in. And then when somebody feels like, oh, this puzzle piece isn't perfectly fitting into the hole that I have here, that means they're not for me. That means that, that somehow this isn't the perfect person, and therefore I'm going to drop that person. I'm not going to... And the other thing that I see, and I'd love to hear you talk about, is that there's really this sense, and I feel like it's a very young idea and feeling, that a relationship, that a person is supposed to be perfect for you. And there's no kind of growing with or evolving with a partner in a way that in a way that, shows the ultimate malleability of both people. You're changing beings. You're not kind of this static entity that you're looking for another static entity that's perfect for you. And so I feel like the flow and the evolution of a relationship and how that sometimes goes up and down. Sometimes you go through stormy periods, but so many people run away at the first stormy period because they think it's a sign, oh, this person isn't perfect for me, because I've been watching movies since I was 2 years old about how, we're supposed to have a person who's perfect for us. And then it's like, butterflies and lollipops for the next 100 years.
Right. Okay. Well, I love that. Butterflies and lollipops. Well, first I just want to validate what you're saying. Yeah, we've been completely hypnotized by society and by culture. And so part of like this work that I'm doing is trying to break my own hypnosis and trying to break the hypnosis of other people into believing that you are actually vacant without this other person. Do I think life is better when you're in love? Totally. That makes sense. Of course it is. And there's no reason to like deny that. There's no reason to deny the fact that like you can feel abundant, but you can want a relationship. But want a relationship because you want so much.
You have so much to offer.
You have so much love in your heart that you have to give it. And of course you want to receive it too, but it's like you just want to give it, as opposed to being like, I'm a wounded child and, I need love, and my parents are not alive, or my parents are alive, but, they don't give me the same love as I did when I was a child. So it's like constantly trying to replenish that. I do believe that with the work that I'm doing, or the strategies that I'm learning, that yes, you're going to go through stormy periods, but I do believe that a relationship can thrive and can have a lot of lollipops, even 50 years in, and rainbows, if we just think about, if you love someone, you would do anything for them. And what's happening in relationships is that we're saying that we love the other person, but we're constantly complaining about what we're not getting. And this idea of perfection, it's another way that we have just become horrible. Like, we are in this weird epidemic where we're judging people for being human. They make a mistake, and all of a sudden we run because we're judging them. And and all we want to do is be accepted for our darkness as well. You have to accept someone else's dark. Someone will grow and change and break patterns when their loved one is accepting them for who they are.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of times in which when in a relationship, when someone first witnesses their partner's darkness, even, if it's just like a single event in a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year relationship, whatever, there's times in which that becomes so big that it's like all they can see. So even though the status quo, the normal of the situation is, a caring, loving partner, that one event of, an explosive outburst or anger or something becomes like the sign that, this person is crazy, or I can't be with this person if they're capable of that,
And, we all have to have standards. If there's like an explosivity that happens and it's directed towards you and you feel like you're unsafe, that's one thing. But if you see someone explode, get curious about it. Like, what's happening? An explosion is pent up energy. Where's the energy? Why is that person like a pressure cooker? Why is that person not, releasing energy on a regular basis? And get curious. Yeah, we do. We tend to wave the white flag, or the red flag, I should say, like right away, and run away.
Yeah.
And then I do think this is like a whole other conversation, but I do think that a lot of us, especially I think women, tend to do this more than men. We see red flags all the time before we actually enter a relationship with someone, and yet we ignore them because we think that we can change them. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, we are, people are stormy. And
sometimes the storms, when you were saying this about being curious, I feel like if we're to, believe yoga philosophy, that these kinds of energies sometimes are just passing through. But we're accustomed to kind of think, oh, that storm that arose originates within, and I need to, figure out the source of that, or the source of that must be something really fucked up. Sometimes things are just passing through. I mean, there's so many energies moving through us and around us at all times. Maybe it's just, the kind of cascading effect of like some really nasty comment that was made by someone in the subway. It's like that chaos theory idea that a butterfly's wings in Texas can create a tornado in Timbuktu. We just don't know often, what is causing the storms of our heart and our mind. And it doesn't mean, just because we have them, it doesn't necessarily mean that they originated within, in that kind of like brute sort of psychological way.
Totally agree with you. I think that we're like all stuck in this weird pattern where we pathologize everyone and everything. And we tend to think, well, there must have been something that happened in his or her childhood, blah, blah, blah. Emotions are just emotions, and we have to not give them too much weight.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to realize within yourself what your emotional center of gravity is. If your emotional center of gravity is anger, then there are certain things that, with coaching, it's kind of great. You could just kind of figure out like what are sort of some of the patterns in that, and I could go into great further detail, but I won't. But there are like these whole strategies around it. If you're, it's fulfilling some need. So if your emotional center of gravity is depression, it's fulfilling a need. Like we get addicted to our emotions all the time. So if you feel like you're in a relationship with someone whose emotional center of gravity is anger or depression, like that's something that needs to obviously be discussed. Yeah. And perhaps, analyzed or whatever, looked into. But yeah, sometimes shit just happens. I mean, I know, especially for women, it's like we have hormonal fluctuations all the time. It's not about what happened, in the womb. It's like I had my period, and I hate to be so crass, but it's like, or like I'm pregnant or I'm PMS. And it's like, it sounds so trite, like as an excuse, but like that's very real. Yeah. Hormonal fluctuations are very real, and sometimes you just get agitated, and it doesn't reflect who you really are. And yes, I do think we're way too judgmental of that. Yeah. For sure. And if you see your partner, there's that word, partner, but if you see your loved one unhappy or seems unhappy in your relationship, the first question you should ask yourself is, what am I not giving this person? Not, what the hell is wrong with this person? Yeah. And I feel like if you ask yourself that, what am I not giving? What am I not providing? Then you have such a greater chance of success in that relationship as opposed to, well, I can't make this person happy, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah. That's great. So one thing, I really love this idea, emotional center of gravity, and I want to just ask you, and I hate to kind of ask a kind of generalizing question, but if you could kind of point out one or two emotional centers of gravity that you think are kind of most represented or seem to, pop up more consistently than other emotional centers of gravity, what do you think those would be?
I mean, it really just depends on the person. I mean, you've heard the saying of someone having a sunny disposition, right? And you speak to someone with a sunny disposition, and I'm talking about like authentically a sunny disposition, not like fake positivity, which we see too often in this community. Like, oh, everything's great when everything's not great, like because that's just like, that's not being real, that's not being truthful. But someone who really does say things brighter. Their emotional center of gravity is like they attribute a certain meaning to life. So life to them, if you were to ask them, life's a journey, life's an adventure, life is fun. It's just a belief system, as opposed to someone with a center of gravity of like sadness. Life's a struggle. That's their belief system. You can change it at any time. It's just a habit or a pattern. I don't know, like, if I see any one particular pattern. I mean, I do think that sadness and anxiety is becoming way too prevalent. And I think that, barring any real psychological issues where people have to be medicated. I do think that people are over-medicated.
Yeah.
And really, there are so many people who are medicated for quote-unquote depression, and they're not really depressed. They're just stuck in a pattern.
Yeah.
I know that there are people who are, and I'm not talking about that, but most people are just stuck
I totally
in
agree
a
with
pattern.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I'm so glad you said that, because I think and I never would want to say that certain people shouldn't be medicated under certain conditions. There are some
Right.
people that absolutely, those prescriptions are very helpful for.
Yeah.
But there's a cultural, dare I say, addiction to the idea that, I need to solve this right away, and that, something that appears pathological, like, the experience of sadness, is somehow something that is reducible to my neurochemistry in such a way that and of course, as we know from neuroscience, the brain is actually hugely malleable, to the point where someone who got into a trauma, I was watching this documentary recently, and this person had a traumatic accident, and it looked like they were going to be paralyzed. But they started to do this form of physical therapy where they started out with the minutest movement, just repeated day after day after day, just cultivating a pattern of, just trying to activate those neural transmitters. And they forged new connections in their brain.
Right.
But it was because of a daily practice. It was because
Right.
of a daily practice. But people don't want to wait. People don't want to take the time to cultivate new habits of behavior. And like you were saying, yeah, it's a pattern and people can change it all the time, but it's hard.
Right.
Well,
it is hard. Well, it's hard because I'm going to demystify something. And this is something I'm going to be talking about in the Uplift Project, this thing that I'm currently working on that's happening next weekend. But the reason why it's hard to change is because our problems are our greatest addiction. Nothing is more addictive, not even heroin, than our problems. Because familiarity is where the nervous system relaxes the most. So it's hard to change, and I speak from experience, it's not a judgment. It's hard to change because there's a part of us, even if it's unconscious, that don't want to change.
Yeah, because it's more comfortable.
Because there's comfort in it, and we like to be comfortable. So there are 3 ways that you can change your state. And your state is basically in direct proportion to how you feel emotionally. So if you're feeling psyched, you have a certain state. If you're feeling sad, you have a certain state. Your state is reflective of 2 things. A, your physiology. You look at sadness, it has a uniform physiology. Shoulders rounded forward, head down, sternum down, voice slow, voice soft, tired, sluggish. When someone's sad, their physiology is that. They're also focusing on something. They're thinking about, why isn't this happening? Why did this happen? What am I going to do? I'm fucked. This or that. Nothing will ever be the same. And then they're using language. Why me? Why? This sucks. So it's something that Anthony Robbins calls a triad. Your state is reflective of your triad. Your physiology, your breath, which is your body and your breath, your focus, what you're actually thinking about, and the language you're using. If you want to change if your emotional center of gravity is sadness, you have to change your physiology immediately. Go to the gym, go do yoga. Anyone who's really sad, they do yoga, they feel a little less sad after. Or sometimes yoga is a little too melancholy. It is. So sometimes it has to be like, go boxing. Because someone who's sad.
Or a soul cycle.
Yeah, yoga is not the only way, because yoga can actually sometimes be too serious. But you have to change your physiology, pranayama. Then you have to start, once you become aware of this, then you have to be like, oh shit, I'm sad because all I keep thinking about is my past. I keep retelling the story in my head of something that happened to me, and this really did happen to me, but I'm living in that story. And I keep using language to describe it. If you take someone and their state is uplifted or they're empowered or they're like in a confident state, their physiology, tall, shoulders back, voice acute, breath full, eyes up. They're thinking about tomorrow, today. The language they're using is, oh, cool, I'm going to make this happen. Life's great. There's a pattern to emotional states. Once you recognize the pattern, it's like math. Once you recognize the pattern, you can decide, okay, I'm going to start to tackle this. But the only way that someone will actually start to tackle it is if they are curious enough, but even more importantly, if they're in so much pain, if they're fed up with how they are currently, that they will change. Some people are not fed up enough.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing I wanted to ask is that there does have to be a certain degree of hope and faith that something like yoga is going to help the situation. Because some people, it seems, are so depressed that they don't even believe that anything can help. Like they literally don't have faith in anything.
Right.
So, what gets, in that kind of a situation, what gets those people out the door? What gets those people's, Nikes or New Balance on?
They need help. They need a coach. They need a trainer. They need a friend. And immediately what I would do with someone like that who has no hope, who doesn't believe, change their physiology. I would get them running.
They have to have some kind of support system that's going to get them out the door.
Yeah, I do. That's why coaching is becoming one of the largest businesses out there today in yoga. It's because once you change your physiology, anything's possible.
Yeah.
Anything's possible. You take someone who's depressed, you get yourself in the worst mood, you go for a run, whatever you wanted. I'm using running as an example. You do yoga, you go to SoulCycle, whatever it is. You change your breath, you go upside down. Immediately you feel different. Immediately. It's instantaneously.
It is. Yeah.
It's instantaneously.
Yeah.
But then you have to start to create momentum. The only way to create momentum is to change your physiology. It's like, and I'll quote Tony Robbins, it's like emotion is created by motion. You want to change your emotions, you got to get moving. How do you get, and then if someone who's not doing it, they need help. They need a coach. They need they need a kick in the ass.
Yeah. And hopefully they have somebody there to, lead the way. So I want to ask you a question. We have a couple more questions, and then we got to get going to your class.
Yes.
I'm going to take Jillian's class today at Kula. But I wanted to ask you, I don't know if this is kind of a tangential question, but I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on it anyway. Yeah. What do you think social media culture, and also kind of the larger pattern that's developing of, meeting your mate on Match.com or OkCupid or whatever, what do you think that is doing to the culture of relationships and how they start? And is this kind of a neutral thing that's not really having any deep impact, or do you think it's deeply impacting the way that we form relationships?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm so for me, I'd never go on a dating site. It's so not my personality. Well, first of all, I think it's reflective of the truth that is we are all desperate for more connection and desperate for more love. I don't know. I can't really speak to it. I know that a lot of people are doing it just to get sex and to go on dates and this and that. There's all sorts of things. And the problem that I see with it is that you read someone's profile and then you make a decision about that person.
Like shopping.
Yeah. And you'll never get a sense of who that person is from their profile, ever. I mean, certainly you can look at the picture and be like,
that person's hot.
Yeah, you can feel attraction or not. And then that's, of course you want to be able to feel attraction, so you can base it on that. But you never really, it just feels like a meat market. But it is also, I know it's really difficult to meet people, and people do really want to love, and they really want to feel loved, and they really want to connect. But I don't know. I'd have to look more into it. I'm biased. I'm just not into it.
Yeah.
I'm just not into it. I understand why it's there, but I'm
Because there's no
it.
longer, there's no longer town hall meetings or like community centers where
Exactly.
where people come for the hoedown and meet, and meet the locals.
And meet the locals.
I mean, it really is. I mean, online has become the new community center.
Yeah.
But okay, so then one question I wanted to ask you: what is your suggestion? And actually, your talk coming up is about rekindling relationships that have kind of moved past their honeymoon period. So this is kind of a related question. So maybe. So the idea of relationship daily sadhana, like the daily practice of a relationship for a relationship that maybe is moving into a period where it's not as easy, but they both really want to stay together, but they're feeling a lack, or they're feeling like something has changed. They're not really sure. Maybe they're feeling less connected. The honeymoon period's over. So what kind of practices, practical, things can this couple do to kind of keep that going?
So the first thing I want to say is, if you want your relationship to come alive, you have to become alive. So rather than treating the relationship as some sort of separate entity that has a life of itself, the life of the relationship is in direct proportion to how much life each person has. So what I would say is, your daily sadhana should be about, how can I become more emotionally fit? Change your physiology, the language you use. What do you focus on? Because if you focus on what's wrong in the relationship, that's where the energy is going to go. But if you focus on what's right in the relationship and try to bring that into the forefront, that's where energy is going to go. So as far as like practical stuff, you just keep thinking, how can I actually come more alive in this relationship? If I feel like I want it to return to a certain place, to where it was earlier, who was I? Who was I when the relationship was great? And I need to return back to that person.
That's such an interesting prescription, because it feels like it's very different from maybe what would happen in certain couples therapy sessions, where it's like you're rehashing old wounds, and it's like you're talking ad nauseum about, a fight that you had, to kind of try to figure out how to get outside it. But what I hear you saying is that don't give it any more energy. Actually augment the good by pouring energy into that, and drawing out the qualities that exist there in the goodness, rather than kind of think that, okay, we had a fight, we have to go back and like figure that out, when really that's just kind of, turning it into a much larger beast.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you never want to ignore the dark. You never want to stuff things inside. But you also don't want to constantly analyze darkness. What I don't like about therapy is just like this constant analyzation of the dark. And you never, ever, ever get lighter by living in the dark.
Yeah.
So you want your relationship to become alive, you have to become alive. You want your relationship to start to be like how it was in the beginning, you have to start acting like the person who you were in the beginning. You want to know why your partner seems unhappy, you have to figure out what it is that you're doing that's not contributing to their happiness. You want to know why you keep having a reoccurring fight. You have and this is something you can go to my on my website at JillianTurecki.com. There's a recording of my last talk, and at the end of the second half of my talk, I talk about a strategy of why like certain fights keep coming up. When a fight keeps coming up, it's literally because you are not seeing what the person is really asking for. All you're feeling is an affront, a personal attack. As opposed to being the detective, which is what I would love everyone to become more of, and myself included. Be a detective. What is this person really asking me? What does this person really need? What are his or her real fears?
Yeah.
It's always about coming back to yourself. I mean, this is like, when a relationship ends, it's always your fault. And I would say that to everyone. It's always your fault. Or not really fault. You were the problem. We always like to think that it was the other person who was the problem, and maybe they were in a lot of ways. But if you continuously think, or one continuously thinks that they were not part of the problem, that they themselves were not a problem as well, you will never, ever get the relationship that you want. Ever.
Because it's sort of like, I mean, not only is it a victim mentality, but it's also, a kind of disempowering yourself.
Totally.
You're disempowering yourself from the power that you have to really create
Whatever
the conditions
it is
for a great relationship.
Exactly. Bingo. 100%. It's all in your power.
Yeah. This is amazing. This has been so great, and you've given so much useful information. Jillian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to ask a couple final questions. Well, actually, first, is there any other, kind of parting advice that you would want to give to couples?
Yeah.
I feel like you just gave a lot, but if there's anything else.
When you love someone, you would do anything for them. If you really love the person who you're in a relationship with, you have to step outside of your own head and into their hearts. See the world, see yourself how they're seeing you. How can you make it better?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my last question, one of the offerings that we give on the website, Five Tapas, is this, it's a resource called the Embodied Philosopher's Library. And it's a library of wisdom texts, yoga books. And so I always ask everybody that I interview if they have one or two or three books that, for you, probably ones that would reflect kind of this discussion that would be really amazing tools that people could turn to learn more about, relationships or the yoga of relationships. I think would be a good thing to call this what we're talking about today.
Right. One of the books I would recommend is A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson.
Okay.
And the second book, anything by the author, she's one of my teachers. She's actually Tony Robbins' business partner. I'm going to mention three books. Anything by the name of Chloe, Chloe, Madanes, Madanes. She wrote a book on relationship, so I would definitely pick that up, and it's a very easy read. And then the third book I would recommend is Intimate Communion by David Deida, and that's all about polarity and masculine and feminine energy and the relationship of the 1950s to the 50-50 relationship now to like intimate communion. And that can be read by anyone, gay or straight. It's just all about the polarity, the different energies, the feminine and masculine energy within us and how that comes up in relationships. So I would recommend those three books.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then finally, where can people? Tell us some things that you're doing right now. Like what's going on with you, and how can people find out more about what you're up to?
So my third talk on relationship is going to be Saturday, November 14th. I've been giving all these talks for free. It's from 1 to 2 o'clock in the Williamsburg studio. I have just a few spots left, maybe like 2 or 3. I'm doing a whole 6-week course starting in January. It's 6 Thursday nights at the studio. You don't have to be present for all of them because I'm fully recording them, so you can do some in the home. And it's like everything that I've been doing for the last year. You are going to dissect your emotional home. You're going to dissect your relation. You're going to observe your relationship, your needs, all of that, what it is to be a leader, leadership skills. So it's good. It's a group coaching course. So I have a few spots left for that, and that's going to be pretty phenomenal. That starts January 7th. And anything else? And then I have the Uplift Project, which is going to be a series of urban retreats that was started by a friend of mine. I'm going to be giving a talk on basically your emotional home and how you can change your state in an instant. Alongside with Taryn Toomey, who's going to be teaching the class, Light Watkins, who's going to be teaching meditation, Naveen Mishan, pranayama.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's what's
what a nice lineup.
Yeah, it's a good.
And then your website, I know you mentioned it earlier, but what's your website?
It's my name. It's JillianTurecki.com.
JillianTurecki.
So almost. So Jillian is Jillian, last name Turecki.
Did I not say that?
No, I think you skipped the E.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that'll also be in the show notes for anybody that's, that's confused.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Jillian. This has been an
Thank
awesome
you.
conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jillian Turecki. If you're interested in finding out more about her and her work, you can go to jillianturecki.com. That's all for today. Thanks so much. Until next time, friends. Bye-bye.